have you thought about a church in South Tulsa? I apparently for years they had talked about it at the conference because all of our churches were pretty much, well, the 11th Street Church, there was New Life, New Hope, New Life, but there wasn't anything past that. So it kind of shocked me just hitting it out of the blue, and then I think my wife and I talked about it a little bit, and it was probably about a month before we had a conversation about what would that look like and what would that be, and so about a month, and then it took us another few months because we were arguing about the details, because their plan was don't split the church up in New Haven. You could have 5 families.
Who's they?
Well, it was Rodney Grove and John Moyer.
Okay.
They thought the best chance of having a church that would be of a different culture is don't just divide and take half the church. It was raise up a new church with new believers, which there's something to that. So the agreement was 5 families. You could recruit 5 families, and it was all kind of quiet.
Oh, hush, hush.
Yeah, she's smiling because she was one of the first ones we went to was Julie. And I don't even remember. I don't want anybody to get upset, but I remember Julie was one of the ones because it was so small. 5 people, 5 family. Are you kidding me? How do you have church with that? So that was, and so it took a few months. And so we just went around talking to those few families and seeing if their hearts resonated the same way ours did. And it was like, yeah. So we knew that God was leading in that.
So one of the other pastors that are up here, and we'll go through and introduce them all in just a couple minutes, but I'm sure most of you guys know who's up here on the platform. But I really want to think about and put a lot of emphasis on the miracles that that happen in your ministry when you were here or currently here at Adventist Fellowship. Just the miracles about some of the things that God has done to move the church forward, to just to encourage your hearts as a pastor, so that you know that He was alive and well. And so, if you want to kind of talk about that a few minutes.
Well, every person we baptize is a miracle. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times we baptized somebody and they died shortly after. Well, I mean, that sounds funny, but there were times when we would get a couple times we got a letter from a family after the funeral thanking us for ministering to that son or daughter or whoever that was, and I mean that's when it gets real. But the biggest miracle is the one we're sitting in. I don't know if Amy's still up there. I still remember the word ginormous because. And let me just tee it up this way. We were at the buildings. We got the 74th, and then we have the 51st, then we have the 41st. We were at the 41st Street building. We had only my recollection, and since this is my story, it's my truth, is about a year and a half, because every building we moved into delivered fewer seats than what we were promised, and even 41st was that way because we had to build that false wall and it kept shrinking down. And our goal was to baptize 100 people that year. And within a year, it was clear that we couldn't stay there and still experience the growth that we were wanting. And so I remember having a board meeting where we talked about that. And, they were thinking, you're kidding me. We just, moved into this and we're sensing that. And so the board wouldn't come to a formal conclusion, but this is what they said. If we get an offer for the building, an unsolicited offer for the building, then we would know that God's leading. Because again, the idea was 50 or 60 or 70 people with all of the other people. There wouldn't be enough. And we were trying to constantly stay ahead of where the growth was. And so we voted that night that if we got an offer, and I still remember it was 1.2 million, which was what that magic number was, if we got an offer. So within a month, Steve Dakel, I still remember his name, I don't know if he's still out there, calls and says, is your building for sale? And I said, well, maybe. He says, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, if the price is right. He said, how much? And I wouldn't tell him. I said, if you want it, make an offer. And it was Life Church that was negotiating through him. And so he set up lunch with me and showed me an offer, and it was 1.28. And when we did the arithmetic, the 8 was his commission. So we netted 1.2. So we sold the building.
I want to go back to the board, though. Like, what was that like, going back to the board and telling them?
But, I mean, you know when you're kind of in that God moment. The real problem was, all right, God did this. Are we really going to sell a building without having another one? Because that's where we were at. So we negotiated a year lease back, but those that have been on this journey knew buildings aren't out there. They're not, we struggled with that, and here we were signing our decree to be homeless after a year, but we did it. And then it was Peter Enns. I don't know if the Enns, they were here this morning. Peter Enns came to my office one day after a few months and said, "You're looking for a building?" And I said, "You bet we are." And he said, "I know where a building is." And he said, "Hey, I got the key." And so I don't remember if we drove out here, but he told me about it. And it was this building. And there was a church in here. And I remember coming on Sunday. And we walked into this during their service, and there were 12 people here. That's how big the congregation was. It had just gone through all of that. And we tried to negotiate the purchase of it. And he strung us along for a while thinking we were going to be able to do something. He had $3.5 million worth of bonds outstanding on it. And he wasn't servicing the notes and all that. And so, long story short, he ended up coming up and saying no. And we were kind of crushed that he finally said no. And so, public record, we found out who owned the mortgage. And I just called them and I said, if you were ever to come back into possession of this property, we'd be interested. And they blew me off. They hung up. Next day, somebody from that company called, the mortgage company down in Texas, and said, "Were you serious?" And I said, "Yeah, if the price is right, we'd be interested." And he said, "What's the price?" And I said, 1.28, or 1.2. And he said, "No, there's $3 million outstanding on that." And I said, "We couldn't do it for that." And well, again, long story short, about a week later, he calls, said, "We're going to foreclose on that, and we're going to try to sell it, but if we don't, will you buy it for the 1.2? And I said, "Yeah, we'll do that." So it goes to a sheriff's sale. I remember Val and myself and a few others were in this room, and it was all these little tiny properties that get, auctioned. Yeah, actually the board, because we didn't have anywhere to go, we went back to the board and said, "Look, this thing is $3 million, and what can because what happens in a sheriff's sale is the people who own the mortgage put the bid in at $3 million or whatever it is." And then I said, "Can I negotiate?" And they said, they said something up to like 2.5. But anyway, we went to that sheriff's sale. They put the bid in, and we were just waiting with bated breath that no other bids would come in, and none did. Wow. So we walked out of that room, and I remember leaning up against the wall of the sheriff's office, and we signed the purchase agreement for this property for $1.2 million. It was amazing. I mean, 55 acres, all of that. Yeah, so if I ever wrote a book, one of the chapter titles would be 1.2 million. It's a magic number. Yeah. It's a God number.
So, Shirlene, one of the things that I've been thinking about was how all this affected you and your family. How were you feeling about all of this? That this fast moving church that was going on. I know that there was a large time commitment from Pastor Bill, I'm sure, as well as you, and then your young family. What was going on with you? Your thoughts?
I'm hoping I won't cough, but I was just
There's
filled.
water.
I know.
Okay.
I was just filled with adrenaline, and I was excited. And Shari and we just ate it up. We were just all about telling others about Jesus and wanting to be there to help with the children's programs and the music. And it was like being a family. You were doing it together with your friends, and it was just the greatest thing, the greatest feeling of all.
We have a chair for you.
Better late than never, James.
Thank you. Kim, we have a chair for you if you want to come up. You're welcome to join us. It's just a casual conversation. While we're doing this, we can, if you guys want to just introduce yourself, go down the line while we're waiting for them to get settled. And when you were here, when you were pastor here, Michelle, we can start with you if you just want to introduce who you are. You got them on? What number? 3.
Hello. Oh, there we go. My name is Michelle Carlisle, and I have been here since it started.
Yes.
Yeah, one of the first families.
Yes.
So.
And then you and Stephen served here from when to when?
I joined the pastoral team in 2006 under Pastor Bill. I started as a youth pastor. So I was not married, and so a couple years in 2008, married Michelle, and we left not this last year, 2017.
Okay.
We left in 2017.
Charlene.
Charlene McClendon. I was going to say, I was Michelle's Pathfinder leader.
You know, what's interesting is that when we started, our worship team consisted of Julie. We have that on tape, by the way, the very first worship service. We should have pulled that out. But I think it was Julie, and Stephen was in, I think, academy or junior academy or something.
I was over at Tulsa Academy. I was
So
9th or 10th
Charlene
grade.
was trying to get you to come, and then you went away from school, and then you came back, and I baptized or rebaptized you, I think, because I saw some pictures of it. I don't really, remember all the details. And then you went away to college, and then you came back, and you really weren't on track for a ministerial. It was more business.
Correct.
But it was, in considering where we were at as a church and what our needs were, I reached out to Stephen and I said, this may be way off the radar, but we would be interested in maybe having you come as a youth pastor. And so I got to call him or be a part of that. I got to call you to Oklahoma. James, I didn't. James was already around here, but Luis. So I had a hand in almost every pastor here so far. So that's good.
That is
That's
good.
pretty cool. Anyway, Bill McClendon, I was here kind of from the beginning, and then you guys kicked me out in about 2000 and, was it 11?
2010?
10,
Late-
11?
late
No, I think
10.
it was 11. I think it was
Anyone know?
11.
10? Shari says 10.
10, maybe it was late 10.
I think it was like November of 10. Like it
Okay,
was
November of 10.
Late 10.
I'm Walter Martinez. I joined Pastor Stephen 6 years ago, and
Has it been that long?
Yeah.
Okay.
Man,
Think
wow.
of Grayson.
Yeah, that's true.
Came right before he was,
Yeah.
in December. And I came on as a media / worship pastor. I kept telling him that please don't put me in the position of youth pastor. I am your associate. I'm here to make sure that you succeed. And it was an incredible journey. The privilege of being able to work with him for, was it 5 years? Yeah. And then became lead pastor of Adventist Fellowship. So I'm currently in that position now.
Blessings. I'm introducing. My name is Carol Mosby. I've been here approximately 6 months. Graduated from seminary this past summer, and I did have quite a few offers. It was my entire prayer. This is my second career. I was actually a chemistry teacher before God called me to the ministry. And my prayer and my husband's prayer was just, let us go where God leads us. We just wanted a God call, not just a job or just a assignment, but where does the Lord want us? So I met Pastor Walter and Elder Shires and Elder Apple when we had it's sort of like a job fair for pastors that they come to the seminary, the various conferences. It's a ministry opportunity day, and so I had, from morning to evening, there were interviews, and I had quite a few offers, but I just kept praying, where do you want us, God? And I said, Lord, whomever, that I can go visit. I wanted to visit. I didn't just want to have an opportunity, and they said, okay, they voted you in. Can I go visit, Lord? And you were the first ones that asked me to come. And when I was flying out and I came, it was difficult. I will just be honest, because, being maybe the second, I don't know. Some people say the first, maybe the second woman here, I'm not sure. But just knowing that in itself is somewhat of a battle. I just wanted to minister. I love Jesus. I love evangelism. I love people. And I want to preach and teach the gospel of Jesus Christ. So wherever that was, I said, but I wanted to be where God wants me. And so he impressed me when I came out. I knew it was going to be a bit of a challenge, and it's been awesome. The people are awesome. There have been difficulties, because that's part of ministry and part of life. But I can say I thank and praise God for being here, being a part of this team, and I'm just in awe of what you all have done, what the founders have done, and all of the charter members, the members now, to take the vision of God and to walk that out. It is, I'm in awe, and I thank and praise God for each of you. Is there any? Okay.
Teacher, pastor, which one?
I'll talk. Imagine that.
So Markel, we want to know who you are, Markel. Let him. He needs to introduce himself. You can just say your name. That's all.
All right, I'm Carol Mosby's husband. Did I almost say wife? My name is Markel Mosby, and like my wife said, we just wanted a place where we could just be used. And I think this is a great place. Not only the sermon penetrated to that desire, that motivation, but just us accepting and coming to Tulsa and the church here. It's been great.
Okay, well, I'm Kim Bakavoy, and my journey with Adventist Fellowship or Ours began before James was a pastor, and he was here doing Native Ministries, and so we were attending the church when it was on 41st Street, and I was children's ministries leader for some time and worked with Charlene and Glenda, and we got children's ministries up and running, and children's church was going, and I was doing the adventures leadership at that time. So that was quite some time ago, and I remember Bill loved my long children's stories. No comment. And bringing live chickens and things into the sanctuary. That was, I don't know if you remember that. Oh, I'm so glad he doesn't remember that. Anyway, Adventist Fellowship is near and dear to our heart, because even though the conference called us in different churches around Oklahoma, every time we come back, it just feels like home.
Amen.
James Parkboy. Now we're on, maybe? I think it kicked on. It's okay. James Bakavoy. Since 2002, been associated with many of you, and we love you. Had the opportunity to work with Bill as Kim was doing children's ministries over at 41st Street, and I just helped out in the sound booth and different places like that. And as I transitioned from full-time Native ministries to pastoral ministry and doing Native ministries, I was able to go down to Stillwell, and when I got that district and got that church, I went straight to Bill's office and said, help. And so he mentored me and taught me and gave me a lot of advice about evangelism, and just said, do it, and then do it again and do it over again. And we did that, and our little church down in Stillwell really grew. So it's been a blessing to be part of the family. And then recently, just a few years ago, came back for about a year and a half, and was, I guess, the senior pastor by age. Thanks to Stephen, called me out.
When we announced that he was going to be a part of our pastoral staff, we announced him as the senior old pastor.
Do you remember the look on Elder Moyer's face?
He was like, wait, this wasn't part of the agreement. So I just want to give a brief synopsis as to why that happened. Kim was a teacher down in Ardmore, and she had moved and accepted a teaching position in Tulsa, and James was still pastoring down in the southern part of the state. And I just looked at that, and I thought, that's not, because they were going to just leave them separated like that. And I said, that just can't be. So I actually called Elder Moyer, and I said, I really believe that they need to be together. I know there's nothing open in the Northeast, but until there is an opening, we have an extra office, and he can come and work here, and we could definitely use his talents and his calling here at Adventist Fellowship. So that's what he did. He came over here, and then when there was an opening in the Northeast, they transitioned him out to be able to fill those roles. But it was a pleasure to have James with us on the team for a very short time, but it was good.
There's a few other pastors. It was about 3 or 4 weeks I was with Keith Knoll for a meeting. He sends his greetings. Wasn't able to be here, but Keith served as a pastor for a short time. Also, what's interesting is when Shirley and I returned to pastoral ministry about 4 years ago to the Baltimore area, they had a Korean church that was meeting in the building, and within a few years, or a year and a half, I'm not sure when it was, I looked down the hallway, and there's Pastor M, who had moved from here, or that house, up to pastor the Korean church up there. So, and then when we moved to Ellicott City, Debbie and Luis had already landed in that area, and so we reached out to them, and they became a part of that church family. And when Shirlene left as the associate pastor there, we handed that off to Debbie. So the family has kind of just all followed each other around, it seems like.
So what I'd like you guys to do now is just talk a little bit maybe about some of the miracles like I referenced earlier. You talked about this building as one of your favorite stories. If you pastors could just share maybe some of the miracles that happened, whether they were financial miracles or miracles with a particular baptism that you did or with people. So I don't know if anyone has a story that just pops in their head that they'd like to start off with. Anyone?
I have one. It's just an example of what children can do. But in all our meetings, we had our children there with us, and they would engage with the visitors' children's. And you don't realize how important your children are until the pastors find themselves meeting with parents, and they say, we want to go to Shari's church, or we want to go to Michelle's church. Or we want to go to Shari and Michelle's church, and Melissa, and I just think the Lord used them in a mighty way.
I'm trying to decide on just a couple.
Okay, we might give you extra time.
Well, there are two that really come to mind, and one of them is Dorothy Inns, which was a healing situation. A healing miracle. Dorothy she went in for a surgery. Things didn't go well. She got an infection and went into a coma. And her brain was having so many seizures that they put her into this induced coma. And she was in coma for, somebody help me, 3 months or something like that. I think it was about 3 months. And we were praying and praying and praying for Dorothy. But it did not look good, and they finally came to Peter and they said, you're going to have to make a decision on what we're going to do here, pulling life support and all these things. And one day we had a prayer quilt for her, but we brought the prayer quilt back to have another time of just praying. And that particular Sabbath, Terry went up and put her hands on Peter and began to pray for Dorothy, and at that same time, Dorothy woke up and has made a full recovery. Amen. And you wouldn't even know that she had any, when I saw her today, I said, there's our miracle woman. Like, it's just absolutely incredible to be a part of that story and see that. So that was number one. I would say another big miracle, and it has to deal with This building, the 1.2 million, was when we paid off the 1.2
Amen.
million. And it was actually set up because we had a new building program that we had started when Bill was here called Expanding the Dream. And we were going to build onto the back of the church and put in new classrooms and things like that. And when Bill left, I just wasn't as good as a pastor. So the numbers went down. And so we said, well, we don't need a building expansion right this second, but let's take, the deal was, the board had voted that all of the money that is raised from that goes into, at certain points, we'd pay off the mortgage or pay off the revolving fund in chunks. And then when it's time to build, we'll take the money out, we'll do that, whatever we need to do. Well, so we just put all that money, and we would stack up this cash of $50,000 and $60,000 and then send it off, and we'd do it again, and we'd do it again. And finally, one day, I remember God, I was really in prayer, and I said, God, what is it that we need to do? And he said, we need to pay off the debt. We need to pay it off. And I said, you know what? So I went and I called the union office, said, what do we owe on our revolving fund? And they said, looks like you're right around 300 and something thousand. And I thought, 300 something thousand? We can do that. So I just kept it in the back of my mind. We were praying about it as pastors. And then I had someone that came to me and they said, you know, I received some inheritance from my parents and things like this, and I would like to pay off the mortgage. And as much as I wanted to say absolutely, I said, but I want the whole church to be a part of it. And so we actually did a dollar for dollar match up to that amount, and we were able to pay. It took us a little bit longer than I had initially anticipated. But in about 8 months, we had paid off that $350,000, and we were able to burn that note. Amen. And I just praise the Lord for that.
I think we need a round of applause for that. That's pretty awesome.
Amen.
Yeah, that is. Amen.
So God knew what he was doing, and it was just really powerful to be a part of that.
Any other miracles?
Well, I'm sitting next to a miracle. This journey for me, stepping into lead pastor, was not easy. I'm one who stays behind the scenes and one who supports others. But I realized that God was putting me in a position to help move things forward. And that experience for me was, you said it's difficult. It is very difficult to pastor in different areas when God puts you to the test. But there's nothing more exciting than being on the edge, like you were saying, Bill, on what God is calling you to do. So spoke with the board pretty much the next meeting that we had after I was established as a lead pastor. We sat down and I established this is the way that we're going to go find an associate. The conference had an idea of what they wanted to do. They had names and so forth. But I spoke with the board, got approval to set up a vision team as well as a search committee team. And I told them that we were going to fly out to Andrews and that we were going to interview students, those who were graduating with their masters. It was very synonymous with what you did with me. But we took with us our church resume, wrote out who we were, wrote out what our mission statement was, what our values were, put that all out so that we could hand it out to students and let them know who we were. And the interesting thing was we were stepping out in faith, first of all, because there were no other churches that were going. It was just conferences. The second thing was I was going off of old relationships that I had with previous professors, hoping that their word was gold. And Dr. Kidder was actually the one who, the minute we touched down and I connected with him, he opened up an office for us. The rest of the conferences had already had their paperwork set out, and I think the students had already signed up to do interviews. We got there late, but the minute that our information went out, a couple people came and interviewed with us, and it was Julie, myself, and Jake, and we were just praying and praying and praying that God would do a miracle. And that first day, we thought maybe we'd have 2 or 3 people. By the end of that day, we were the only ones left in the office. We had to close up the office, and we had interviewed, I think, 27 people, because our resume had gone around and people were wanting to meet us and to talk to us and get to know us. And when Carol and Markel stepped in, what was fascinating to me was just the presence. I can't put my finger on it to this day. Just to know that you guys were on fire for doing whatever God was calling you to do. And immediately, Jake and Julie and I just kind of, we leaned in and we went into this interview like no other interview that we had done. The questions that we were asked, everything was just being answered on point. And we prayed about it that night and came back the next morning and said, if she's willing to interview again, then we know that God is blessing in this area. Otherwise, we'll continue seeking. And within a matter of minutes, I think Dr. Hive had called you, and you came back in between classes. It's just everything fit perfectly. Then it was, how do we come back to our board and go through the process of, how do we come back to the Oklahoma Conference and go through the process? Well, lo and behold, across from us was Elder Shires and Elder Park, and they had been praying as well. Everything began to fit. It was as if we were simply pieces of a much larger puzzle that God was putting together. And by the time we came back to the board, everything started to fit together. It was not easy. It was not easy. But it was hard to deny that God's finger wasn't behind all of it. Every single step was just an open door, open door, open door. By the time we were done, and Pastor Carroll was coming on board, I just knew beyond a shadow of a doubt this is exactly what God wanted. He had set this up from the beginning, and it's a miracle. It's just a miracle. There's so much that you're doing for, in fact, I'll pass you the microphone because there's so much that you're doing, and we're hearing about the children's ministries and things like that. God has brought you for such a time as this.
Praise God. Just piggybacking off of what you were saying, when I was not even supposed to interview with Oklahoma Conference, it wasn't on my radar. I had other conferences that I had chosen. And someone mentioned it, and so when I met Elder Shires, he asked me to come over and speak with you all, and it truly was the Holy Spirit. It was just God, because I had thought of another conference, and they had made me an offer, but it was just the Spirit of God kept dealing with me about Oklahoma, and I had never been to Tulsa, didn't know anything about it, but as we went forward, after I came and visited, it was God, and I did not realize, as I said, it was difficult. But, you know, when God gives you something to do, as Pastor Bill was saying today, there are issues and situations that come up, but just being focused and knowing that God has called me here and that he has appointed me for such a time as this to just help to evangelize and to do the work that God has. And I want to say also that it's been a blessing working with you, Pastor Walter. He's an awesome senior pastor. I may be his senior numerically, but he is a wealth of wisdom and knowledge, and I'm very thankful. Right now, one of the things that they teach you in seminary is to wait. When you arrive at a new place, you wait 6 months. Well, God was impressing upon me. I arrived here in August. He said September 15th, and I was praying like, Lord, what is this? And he laid on my heart, you need to go out into the community. And it's against everything that they were teaching us. And I went to Pastor Walter and I asked, can we get a team and go out to the neighborhood? And so we did. It was about, 15 or so people. We went out, and God had told me plan a children's church, what we call AF4K, Adventist Fellowship for Kids, so that when the community comes, you will have a place that they can enter in, the young people, and then have it as well for the church. And so just within a month or so, we were off the ground, AF4K, our young people, our middle school and high school students come out and help. They're the ones that actually run the program. They're our praise team, our drama team, our craft team. They run the program so that when they are older, it's not something foreign to come to church to be active. And our young people, it's growing each month. They love coming out, the little ones, and it's just a phenomenal time. So, yes, AF4K is off the ground. We're doing outreach. We haven't done it as much because it's so cold, but once the weather warms up, we will be back in the community. So that's what I've been doing. Praise God.
So
Just a shameless plug, AF4K, the 23rd of this month. There we go.
Good commercial. Okay. Were there any other final thoughts that any of you might have, Pastor Bill? Any words of wisdom?
Miracles?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, again, how do you boil it down to one? I think that people, my experience is you see what you look for. And if you live in expectation that God is here, that God is blessing, you'll see the miracles. You'll see them, you know, in little ways, and you'll see them in big ways. It's not just Dorothy, by the way. Peter was sharing his experience. You know, the prayer times that we used to have. You know, how many lives that touched, and how many, you know, that God did a miracle for me. And maybe that doesn't always get broadcast around the church. You know, sometimes pastors get to hear a little bit more about what is happening. But I think if there was anything that I appreciated about our church was the sense that when people walked in, they were expecting that God is going to do something, that God's going to speak to me through His Word, that God's going to use me to minister to somebody, that God is at work among us. And when we have that, when we can foster that kind of atmosphere in a church, God shows up in all kinds of ways. And I think that is, if there's anything that is exciting about a church family like this, it's that. And some of the miracles you never hear of, you know, but they're real.
I do remember when we did the 40 Days of Prayer, we specifically prayed. One of the things was for the school. Amen. And Tulsa Academy was going through a really tough time. And it was in that time that we saw just some major things turn around. And Tulsa Academy is just, ever since, those prayers of that expectancy of what God would do, I've seen God work miracle after miracle at that school and grow it. It's been powerful. You remember that? Yeah?
I do.
I remember evangelistic meeting that we didn't send any handbills out.
Yeah.
The leadership team had been on me for that for a few years, and I was always terrified that we were seeing a disengagement and relying on handbills, and so it was thought of, let's do an evangelistic meeting where we don't do any handbills, and we'll just invite everybody. And I remember at the end of that the same number of people were baptized, but they were husbands and fathers and mothers and people that we knew. And that you know, that in itself was kind of a pretty amazing thing.
My husband was one of those. Yeah.
I know that.
Yeah. Is it? Yeah. Pastor Walter, did you have any other?
I was just, as Pastor Stephen was talking about bringing the church, you know, out of debt and just be debt free. It's kind of an inside joke in my head, and with Pastor Carol, it's like Pastor Stephen got us out of debt, and I took us right back in. But what I found is closing out 2018, because Pastor Carol leading the prayer team and the two of us, our entire staff, just praying and asking God. We are spending, but we're needing to spend. We're needing to take care of this building. We're needing to make sure that we've got, you know, our heating and air units are working, all these other things that are happening, because we're a 30-year-old building. And so now it's time to replace a lot of stuff. And Julie's part of our team as well as the worship coordinator. And it's just stepping out in faith and just watching us go down financially. But we kept trusting in God. We began pushing hard in December for giving and closing out the year well. And I was truly amazed to see what had happened. We had a couple of donors who said they would, you know, if we matched, we'd get a certain amount. We finished off the year way ahead. And it helped because we needed to take a loan to be able to pay for the things that are taking place. What that did for me is it was because I'm not a business major, so I'm not very savvy with these things. But what it did was what God was saying to my heart was, I've got this, and it's going to be okay, but you've got to trust me. So we launched this year the Nehemiah Project. And deep down inside, you know, the question is, well, are we going to have the money, or why do we take a... No, that's not the question. The question is, how big is your God, and how much are you going to trust Him to come through? It's a miracle in the making. This year is going to be incredible.
So in recognition for the service that you guys and ladies have given to Adventist Fellowship, and in recognition for what you've done, I know that Our church is very appreciative for the sacrifices that have been made and the leadership that has been shown. And so there's a special presentation that we're going to do right now.
First of all, I got to believe if this is a time of recognition, then I believe credit should be given where credit is due. And this event became from a thought that became a vision, which prompted action that's made this event possible. So that thinker, Ed Sweezy, thank you, thank you, thank you. You know, we gave it a great bit of thought as to what to give you guys for being here, and our first thought was a all-expense trip paid to Hawaii. Then we realized it would be something that you would enjoy, and then you'd forget it. I mean, you wouldn't even remember this day at all. So we wanted you to have something tangible, something you could hold in your hand and see and remember. We saw the excellent, great commemorative bulletin. We thought that might work, but then we went a little bit beyond that. And actually, we got you a heavy glass engraved paperweight for your desk. And remember, it's the thought that counts. I was thinking about Pastor Moyer, and I was hoping he would be here today, but I first met him as my pastor over at First Church. He baptized our daughter Stephanie and our son Stephen. But the biggest deal of all with John Moyer was after more than 60 years of prayers for Joyce's dad, Bo Hannon. Pastor after pastor had tried to get that guy in the tank. They tried to connect with him, but it was Pastor Moyer that got him baptized. It was a very, very special day for our family. And later, as president of the Oklahoma Conference, I was privileged